She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith, including plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age. But she ran away. She chose hell over a life of polygamy. That girl was me. I was lost, alone, desolate. Then Jesus Christ found me and rescued me. In His love, I found real freedom. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him. This is why I can look back and ask, polygamy? What love is this? Welcome to Polygamy, What Love Is This? I'm your host, Doris Hanson, and we talk about Mormon polygamy on this show. And today we have a special guest who was born and raised in the Kingston Polygamy Group, whose story is very interesting. But before I introduce him, I'd just like to say that if you would like more information about how a shield and refuge can help you or someone you know get out of a polygamy group with a safe place to go, you can go to the website shieldandrefuge.org, or you can call toll-free 877-425-9993, and all information discussed will be held in complete confidence. And if you have questions or comments about our show or any of our show, or if you would like to be a guest, you can send an email to email@whatloveisthis.tv or call 385-240-2888. You know, we are always very excited to talk with people who want to share their experiences in polygamy. Our guest this time has a unique story, which we hope that you'll enjoy and learn some interesting information about the early days of the Kingston Polygamy Group. He was born and raised in the Kingston Polygamy Group. I knew him and his family while I was growing up, but I didn't know them real well because most of the time we lived in different parts of the state. He has written a book about how his parents were married in the LDS religion and then seduced into Mormon fundamentalism of the Kingston Polygamy Group, and he writes about the mysterious death of his father. And so to get started, I would like to introduce and welcome our guest, Charles E. Mattingly. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and for being willing to talk about your story. You wrote a book, and it's entitled Murder at the Mine. It's on the screen. And we want to discuss, first of all, the particulars that you cover in the book. But first of all, I'd like to our viewers to get to know you better and your story and your experiences, to better understand you and why you wrote the book and why you think your father was murdered, which is what the title of the book is about. So first of all, where can our viewers buy your book?
You can go on my line, my website, which is scenichikingphotos.com, and order it, and I'll ship it out to you. Or locally here in Salt Lake City, there's 3 bookstores that are carrying it right now.
Ken Sanders.
Ken Sanders.
Rare Books.
Rare Books. Ebon Rare Books. And Golden Braid just picked some up yesterday or the day before.
Okay. So Ken Sanders is on 268 South 2nd East.
Yes.
And Eborn Books is on 254 South Main.
Correct.
And the new vendor is, what's the address?
They're at 151 South, 500 East.
Okay. So there's 3 places in Salt Lake City that they can get your book or go to your website and order it from there.
And order it.
Okay. So good. It's a very interesting read for those who are interested in polygamy in the Kingston group and a lot of the beginnings of the early days of the group right after it first started. So let's begin with you. You were born and raised in the Kingston group. What do you remember about your childhood? Do you have good memories about growing up?
There were some good things, but there was lots of vacancies. In other words, there were lots of things that didn't happen that should have happened. I don't remember a real strong family life. I remember me and my 2 brothers and some of our friends was playing at the mine in the mountains a lot. I remember when we moved to Salt Lake in 1958, because the younger kids had to be away from the mine to start school. And I worked at Valley Feed and Coal Company. I don't know if they're even still there anymore.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
But I worked there. All three of us boys worked there. In fact, my older sister managed it for a while. But we worked there cleaning the chicken coop, gathering eggs and feed and coal and whatever, helping. Paid a grand total of 25 cents an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, they were good at their pay, weren't they? You mentioned several times in your book that they, as a group, they neglected. There was a lot of child neglect in the group. What kind of neglect did you see, and what kind did you experience?
Well, the neglect was basically the mother was the only one to take care of them. There's never any men around to take care of them. There's no guidance from a man. Neglect, me and my brothers, when we was just teenagers, we just decided we was going to go hiking sometime. And we took off for 3 days and never told anybody. And when we came back, nobody seemed to care. We was back and it didn't matter.
Oh, my word.
We was gone for 3 days.
How old were you?
I think I was probably 10 or 11.
Oh, my
maybe
goodness.
younger, I don't remember.
And nobody
for sure.
said anything. If I did that when I was little and came back in 3 days, they would have whopped me. And
We'd just go whenever we wanted, whatever. And
Oh.
I remember many a times, just as kids, that I couldn't even swim. We'd go down the river, and I was always scared because the older kids could jump on the logs and go across, and I had to somehow get across or get left behind, and I was always afraid I was going to fall in and drown, and somehow we made it.
But yeah, we made it. That's true. But there wasn't any adult supervision in these, no matter how little you were. Okay, you wrote that your mother was more concerned about the leaders of the Kingston group than she was about herself or anything else. And I want to quote from page 82, what you said. Mom was more concerned with what Eldon Kingston, and he was the leader of the group, she was more concerned about what Eldon Kingston told her than with the safety of her children. Why could the co-op not send men to the houses that needed help? The co-op was always claimed that they help their own. Now, the Kingston group has a nickname called the co-op because of their name is a cooperative, Davis County Cooperative
Correct.
Society. They also have a nickname called the Order. So once in a while we'll say one or the other so our viewers will know that we're talking about the Kingston group. Now, you said they didn't help their own, but isn't that what the United Order is all about, that they help their own?
They talked about it all the time and everything, and when I was younger I seen a little bit of it, but not a lot. But at that time when I was living in West Jordan, I was very young, and it was, I believe it was the winter of 1948, one of the coldest winters Utah had ever experienced. And the snow was so deep on the houses it was caving them in if they didn't get the snow off. And so Mom had to get the snow off the house, and nobody from the order would come and help her. And she was afraid to get up there. And she remembered that Eldon told her that don't ask anybody to do a job that you can't do. So she asked her oldest daughter, Charlene, if she would get up and help her. And Charlene says, Mama, you don't have to do that, I'll do it. And so then she says she was relieved from asking somebody to do a job that she couldn't do.
And so they say we're here to help each other, so it's all for one and one for all, and nobody's going to be in need. And then they give you a guilt trip for asking for something that you are in need of.
Yes.
Especially when there are so many women that are in need in polygamy groups.
About the only time you'd get any help in the inner families is when one woman would go help another, and there was, for hard jobs that had to be done, it had to be the kids to get it done, though. No men was ever around to help do it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. You also said something on page 86 I want to quote. The leaders of the co-op showed no concern for the families. They were only concerned with establishing and increasing their financial empire. First, it is believed they paid a part in my father's death, and the family must go without the basic necessities needed to survive just so the co-op could take the money and increase their empire. So we're going to talk about your father's death in part 2, or this is going to be a 2-part show. So we'll discuss your father's death in part 2, but let's talk about them building their financial empire. They had more interest in that than they did in the families and in helping the women like you talked about.
They always taught in their Sunday school classes, if you can call them that, using the term loosely, but they always taught that you had to make money and you had to consecrate it and turn it into God, that you wasn't supposed to go spend it or anything. And as kids, we was expected, while living at the mine, to make what was called dummies, and that's just the clay dummies to hold the dynamite in when they were shooting. And we would make them, and it was expected to keep ahead of the miner's need, and we was paid like 2 cents a dummy for them. So working all day long, you may make $1 or $2. Depends on how good you was, but you never made a lot of money.
And I want to talk about that a little bit later too, because that's a very interesting note that you made in the book about it. But they would ignore, so that they could become a financial empire, they would ignore the economical needs of the families, especially big families. They had big families, and the widows and the women, and not allow you to spend the money you make for them.
I had two real conflicts with them. This is later on in life. I hope I'm not skipping too far ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was a teenager. I was going to West High School in Salt Lake City, and I joined the Junior Achievement Club. And I don't know if you know what that is. It's where the high school kids learn business ways in the world and everything, and make a club. They produce a product, take it out and sell it, and they sell stock to get money to get materials to produce the product. They sell the product, produce it and sell it, and then at the end of the year they pay all the stockholders back. Hopefully they can pay them back more money than what the stock was. The stock was only $1 a share at the time, but I remember, and they voted me in as treasurer, so we'd gone out and sold a lot of the product to some of the stores. We was making a lint brush to clean lint off your clothes. And I had probably $20 or $30 of the fund money with me, and I needed to buy something on the way home, and I didn't have any of my money with me, and I thought, no problem, I've got money turned into the co-op. I can use some of this money and just go get it and replace it before I have to take it to school. So I used it and got the things I needed. I went up to the office to get it, and the lady there told me I couldn't have the money. All my money had been applied to my mother's debt, and I didn't have any money anymore.
Oh, my word.
And that took quite a doing to get that, because I was afraid that I was going to be prosecuted for embezzlement.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. And how old were you?
I was probably about 15.
Wow. They did that. You would turn the money in. I remember the same kinds of things like that. Not exactly the same story, but if we needed money or wanted money and needed something, we had it on our statement. They never gave you a paycheck, but they put it on a statement piece of paper that you had that much money in their account. But you went to get it. They'd give you a guilt trip.
Yes.
They would talk you out of it. They'd lecture you.
I'll skip a little bit more if you don't mind. Another one, when I was a little older, I'd returned from the Army, and I wanted to buy a car, and I'd been sending money home to my brother to turn in for me, and I had $400 or $500 in there. Not a lot. It's a lot them days to me, but not a lot now. But I wanted to buy a car, and I found a '57 Chevy that was used, and it was $375. I told the guy I'd buy it. So I went up to the office to get the money, and I was told no, I couldn't have it, that I hadn't got their permission to buy the car, and they didn't have any money to give me, and they wasn't going to give it to me.
And yet you had the money in their account.
It took a lot of bitter argument with the lady, and I'm avoiding names, but
yeah. There's horror stories of some of the I've heard from some of the members. Your mother was a widow, and this is after many years after she joined, but she was a widow with 6 children, and she was a faithful member of the Kingston Polygamy group, but she didn't have any place to live at one point, and so she asked the leader of the group for permission to live in a tent at the coal mine. Would you explain what happened with that?
Well, I was too young to know then, but I remember a little bit of the move down, but at the time, she asked permission to move into the tent, and she was granted permission on the condition that she pay for the tent. She bought it from them, but it was just an old Army surplus tent.
And she had no income, she had no husband, she had the 6 children.
I don't even think her pension had started yet. She had 0 income.
Yeah, it didn't sound
like... It might
like...
have started by then, I'm not sure. But she had to buy it, and then we moved down there. If any of you are familiar with old Army surplus tents, it was big enough for maybe a squad of men. It was just a canvas, with a door in it, no windows in the side. And I explained in the book, and I showed pictures of it where she actually cut the canvas, made a window in the side, made windows in the door, petitioned it off so the boys on one side and the girls on the other side. I think she eventually got running water in there just to wash your hands with, but other than that, there was nothing. If you used the restrooms, we had to go outside.
They forced poverty on you, and we'll talk about that too as we go. Your mother later married a man by the name of Stan Pratt, but it wasn't a legal marriage. It was a spiritual, what they call a spiritual marriage. Why didn't they get married legally, and did he have another wife?
Let me back up on that just a little bit. Stan Pratt was married to Mom's sister at one time, and they was both in the co-op. They got divorced, and her sister left and went back to the Mormon church, and Stan was in the co-op, so he's basically our uncle. But I think it was C.W. Kingston. I use Kingston's name because they're all over the internet anyway. That's some of the few names I'll use. But he came to Mom and told her, and this is only weeks after the funeral. You're not supposed to see any other men, and if you do start seeing any men, the only man you're allowed to see is Stan Pratt.
So they got to
They picked her.
control her romantic life, as it were.
And we never knew him all the time growing up as anything other than an uncle. We never knew him as a stepdad or anything, but technically he was. I mean, he was there.
Did he have another wife?
He didn't at the time. No, he'd married Mom's sister.
But he
divorced
didn't.
her. He didn't take on another one.
And they didn't tell you that you or your siblings that your mother had married him. They kept that a secret.
Yes.
Until years later. Why did they keep that a secret from you, and how did you feel when you discovered the truth?
Well, the reason they keep it a secret, I believe, is because they keep everything secretive. Because if everything they did was brought out in the open, then most of them would be in jail, I'm sure. But they keep everything a secret. They tell people they're not supposed to talk to anybody. That you're taught that as a child, you're never supposed to go to the police officers for help if you're lost. You're supposed to avoid them because they're dangerous. That you should stay away from them. And everything's secretive, and only the people right around you know what's going on at that minute, and that's not even talked about with other people. Everything's secretive. They're covered. I thought, and I've written in my book about it, if this is the way of God and the Word of God, and this is what you're supposed to be doing, why is it kept a secret?
Yeah.
And why does the leaders of the co-op go to entice the women to join instead of the men? And they get the women. I referenced it in my book.
And we're going to talk about that too, about how
Okay.
your mother joined and so on. Your mother's first baby with Stan was a son, and they nicknamed him Pedro. Pedro?
Pedro.
Explain that nickname, which goes right in with what we've been discussing about the secrecy.
I don't know where the name Pedro come from, because everybody had nicknames. Like Rosie's nickname was Pumpkin, and Honeybee was Alice. And I don't know who picked these nicknames.
You mentioned that they had to run and hide,
Yes.
and so they called him Pedro because I guess.
Well, I might have inferred that, but I wasn't thinking that. I don't know why they called him Pedro. It was, but you're right. Every time a strange card come into town, into camp, then the kids would all be taken and hidden somewhere. The public wasn't allowed to see the kids or know that there was kids there. I went down there and visited, I don't know, several years ago now, before I started the book. And my wife was with me, and would talk to the kids and ask them who they were, anything, and they would just look at us blank and run away, and they wouldn't even answer us.
Yeah. And I've been through to other polygamy groups where the kids see a stranger and they'll turn and run in terror. They're terrorized by looking at strangers.
They're taught from birth on that anybody outside the co-op that they don't know immediately, or other organizations, if you want to do that, they're taught that they're wicked people and they'll take them to bad places and do bad things to them.
That's right, they do that, and that's terrorizing for the children, and it certainly isn't healthy for them. Your family was groomed the same way my family was about the secrecy, and so when I left, I had difficulty. I was 18 years old when I ran away from the group, but I still had difficulty talking about anything for years. I couldn't talk about the fact that I was from a polygamy group or anything about my mother's being a polygamist wife and so on, until years later. Did you have that same difficulty?
Kind of, but a little bit different. I had the difficult time of talking about it, but it was more that I hadn't. It's more that I hadn't 100% broken my ties, I think. I still somewhat believed in them, and I didn't want to do them any harm at the time. It took several years before I said, hey, this is BS. You know, there's nothing there. If I want to tell the truth, I can tell the truth.
Right, yeah, and we're supposed to be truth tellers,
I think. It didn't bother me to talk to them as far as that it upset me or anything. It's just that there was still a part of me saying that was supposed to be secret and not brought out in the public. Because they do one heck of a good job brainwashing.
Yes, they do. They absolutely do. Now, you wrote this book, Murder at the Mine, which we'll talk more about the mine in our next part 2. But in writing the book, obviously your vows of secrecy or your threats of secrecy are gone. You have no fear about talking about what is going on. You published the book. Has anybody threatened you after you wrote the book? Has there been any negative comments about it?
I'm so far away from the Kingstons that I've been warned that they would threaten me and come and kill me, and I say, if they do, so be it. I've had 70 years, so if they want to take it early, let them be it. But I said, it's something I had to do, I'm doing it. But
So
I live so far out of the state that I doubt that ever bother, although I know that they own stores right in the same town I live in.
Yeah, they own stores all over the Intermountain West. So you haven't had any threats, though, as a result of the book?
No direct threats. My brother, he didn't want to get involved too much because him and his wife says they had threats over some other things that, because they used to be involved with legal stuff of serving subpoenas and everything, and they got threatened by the Kingstons that they was going to be killed and everything. So they, and I don't know how true that is. It's just from them. They said that.
Yeah, well.
So, but I never personally had any threats.
I don't think we should take I think we should take them seriously when they threaten us, because that's the way we were raised. You know, we'll get you if you do, or God will get you if you do. In chapter 13, you begin talking a lot about your life and what life was like at the coal mine. Now, this was a co-op-owned coal mine down in Huntington, Utah, and it's owned by the Kingston Polygamy Group. In fact, they owned it till just a few years ago, and it made them millions and millions of dollars. You wrote they used child labor, and you talked specifically earlier about making dummies. And I thought that brought back memories to me, because the first, probably when I was kindergarten and first grade, I was down, my mother lived down at the mine, and then we moved to Salt Lake after first grade. But we, as kids, little kids, 4 and 5 years old, would climb that mountain and go into the coal mine and make dummies. And those dummies are, explain what the dummies were.
Well, it's a clay sack. Well, they're not used anymore, but it was a clay sack that was about 2 to 3 inches in diameter and 15 to 18 inches long. And when they drilled a hole in the coal, they would fill the coal full of dynamite and then pack dummies in behind it, hard like a rock, so that when the explosion went off, instead of blowing back out the hole, it would break the coal up.
Okay.
And they would shoot off 100 sticks of dynamite at a time, and if I remember right, there were 17 holes in a face, what they called a face. There were 17 holes. Each hole had 5 or 6 sticks of dynamite in it, and then behind each dynamite there was 3 or 4 dummies packed in.
Yeah. And they let the kids go up there, child labor, illegal child labor, in a dangerous coal mine situation.
I don't remember where we had to actually go underground to make the dummies.
We went in the mouth of the mine, I remember that.
We was outside whenever I did it on the dry clay dirt, but we was allowed to wander around and play in the mine anytime we wanted to.
I remember going inside the mine.
There was a lot of times I was way back in the mine. I mean,
We were just little tykes.
right.
Now, you talked about child neglect earlier, and I don't know, I would never dare let any of my children do anything like that.
Leaving the trail going up to the mine was very dangerous.
Yes, it was.
If you took the normal long trail around, you're close to the cliffs and stuff, it's like mountain climbing. Or a lot of times later on, they let I don't know how old before they let the kids do it, but you go right up through the equipment and go right over the...
No, we didn't do that when we were going. Okay. I quote from page 99. The co-op taught that we must do this work to keep in good standing in God's eyes. From very early in life, they taught that everyone must work and save their money in the co-op banking system. Now, we've talked about that a little bit already. It was my experience that if we ever needed the money that we made, we had to go through all of the ritual that we've talked about already, and yet sometimes they still wouldn't give you your money. But others have actually had thousands of dollars hidden from them. And when they leave, or if they leave, they can't even take that money with them. Did you have an experience like that when you left?
I don't remember leaving any money with them because I pretty well was getting fed up with them. I pretty well spent all my money. I might have even been in debt, I don't know. I made sure that it was within $50 either way, that I wasn't leaving any money.
It was gone, right. There's a lot, I've heard a lot of stories, horror stories about that.
Several times money was taken from me that I thought was unjustly, and I didn't fight that. One time was when I had an auto accident, and insurance was supposed to pay it all off, but the paperwork got submitted wrong, so Utah Power and Light was billing separately for the pole that was damaged, and the co-op just paid that off and then held it out of my money.
Okay.
And I could have fought it because insurance was supposed to pay it, but I just said, okay, it's done, it's done.
Now, you mentioned mind control, and you talked about it in your book, too. And so I'm going to quote from page 101. There are many cases of brainwashing, mind control, or any other term that may apply, and in each case, if you follow it deep enough, you will find many cases are one of the following: mental, physical, or sexual abuse. The co-op uses all of them. Now that's, of course, the co-op being the Kingston Polygamy Group. Do you believe that the Kingston Polygamy Group uses the same kind of mind control as, say, Jim Jones did at Jonestown, or David Koresh did in Waco, or Warren Jeffs did in the FLDS?
I don't know if I referred that in my book. I don't remember, but I did refer to that when I gave a speech at the library in Tucson. Yes, they used the same power, and yes, I think if the Kingstons asked all the leaders to commit suicide, put it bluntly, that I think most of them would. I think that they're brainwashed to the point where that if they don't do what the Kingstons tell them to do, they're going to be damned into hell and live a life in eternal hell.
And that's what we were taught. We were taught that, absolutely. So when you leave, that's what you're going to do anyway, is go to hell. You wrote very quickly on page 104 about the death of your baby sister, who was a daughter of Stan. And I quote, "An autopsy was never performed. There was no record of her birth or of her death. So the real cause of her death was never found out, and we will never know. She was buried at a spot at the Trail Canyon coal mine formerly owned by the co-op." How did you feel about that kind of treatment of your baby sister?
I was really young at the time, and I wasn't real close to her. I knew her. I mean, I knew of her and everything, but I just knew that it wasn't right and shouldn't happen. My brother said he was real close to her, and he was very upset and torn over it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was pretty deep in their brainwashing control.
Yeah.
That things happen, okay, it happened, just move on and don't worry about it.
And it's not unusual. And I even hear recent stories of women who have lost babies, newborns, and they don't issue the birth certificates at birth, and so they'll bury them sometimes in their backyards, and there's no record of their birth or their death. They just are an unknown.
And I don't know if this is a good place to put it, but that's the Kingstons have said, especially, I won't say his name, one of the Kingstons said they always do everything legal and everything.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a law in the books in Utah since about 1905 that all births and deaths have to be recorded with the state.
Mm-hmm, that's true. Well, thank you. We're going to do part 2 and talk more about the murder. And I want to thank you, Charles, for coming and talking about these things. In Acts chapter 2, verses 44 through 35, it says that all believers were together and had everything in common, selling their possessions and goods they gave to anyone as he had needs. Polygamy groups will use these verses to justify their selfish greed and their United Order organization. But in reality, those verses in Acts do not mandate today's polygamy groups like they say. Instead, they believe the Christ-like love that believers had for one another, and that's how they explain it. It is not mandatory giving, it was voluntary. Nor did they cease providing for their own families in order to give everything to just a few selfish, greedy men at the top. Jesus Christ is the gospel. He is the truth. And Jesus is the only way to heaven. Polygamy and the United Order are abusive paths away from, not towards the truth. Thank you for watching. See you next time.